new books are issued at the end of the 5-year period. In terms of the, the what we charge as a ministry and by extension our missions, those fees are calculated based on the administrative services that we have to provide. In particular, we try to recoup the cost of having to courier the passport applications and then the passports back to the mission. So our charges would of course be different from 6,000 Guyana dollars. And so we would normally have, bearing in mind the country which is being serviced, we would look at how we price our fees. For example, we have in the US it's $80 for a passport application.
As in Manhattan or in
well,
Washington?
United States, everybody.
Entire?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, appreciate it.
But just a corollary to that, P.S. Harper, if someone wants more pages in their passport, they pay more for that. Is that right?
No, Minister, the books are printed as is. The books have set pages, so everybody's book is, they get what, yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's no longer that accommodation for
more pages.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Do I take the silence that members don't have any additional questions for this agency? With that said, Honorable Ambassador and team, we would like to thank you all for making an appearance to the Public Accounts Committee, and I trust that you have the best of the remainder of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please allow me to extend the ministry's thanks and for the support that we continue to receive from the Ministry of Finance in guiding us through these procedures, as well as the Auditor General, who keeps a very keen eye on what we do.
We ensure that he does. Thank you, Ambassador. So, all right, members, on item 3, we have to examine the performance audits, and 3 performance audits were recommended. 1, the procurement, storage, and distribution of COVID-19 supplies, management of drugs and medical supplies at the Ministry of Public Health Facilities, and the management of healthcare waste at the hospitals. We'll ask the Auditor General to give us an overarching view of this performance, these respective performance audits before we invite the agency, so that we can have a level of understanding before we interrogate the agency coming before us. AG, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, I will ask the manager in charge of these audits to give that to Ms. Carol Kant.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
ma'am.
Okay, so I'll start with the definition of what a performance audit is. A performance audit refers to an independent examination of a program
after a very long time. Many efforts were put, but reasons were provided. However, welcome again, and I guess you are aware that this is a new, somewhat of a new step for the Public Accounts Committee, in the sense that we are bringing before the PAC performance audits for respective agencies that the audit office would have conducted. And it so happened that your ministry happens to be the first that is going to be a part of this new phase of the Public Accounts Committee with regards to us interrogating performance audits. And we're happy with this new development of the Public Accounts Committee, and I'm certain that your well-endowed team that is here with you can definitely lend assistance that would be required based on the questions that are posed. With that said, I'd like you to introduce your team with you before we get started.
Good morning, everyone. All protocols observed, and thank you, Chairman, for inviting us today. I would like to start from my left. This is Mr. Levan DeSantos, the current Assistant Director at the Materials Management Unit, but he's also the Deputy of the National Pharmacy Services in the country. Mr. Jacks is the former Director of the MMU, and he's here to aid us in this audit report. To my right is Nalini Giltari, Acting Chief Accountant. Starting from my right, Dr. Griffith is the Deputy Director of the Regional Health Services. Ms. Craig, Manager at the Warehouse Non-Medical Supplies section. And I think the remaining team is CDC with the PS of PM on the, since it's part of CDC here. We did invite the former PSs, Ms. Adams and Mr. Trevor Thomas, but I haven't seen them here. We also invited Ms. Jasmine Ramatan and two procurement officers. I haven't seen them as yet, sir.
Chair, may we ask for the year of appointment of the officers that are being introduced, please?
Yes. 2017, 2022. 2019, you can go ahead. 2015, Ms. Fred. Yes.
And Member Barnett, can you introduce your team?
Morning, Chairman and other members of the. To my right is Ms. Tanisha Agard, Internal Auditor of the GDF. Next to her is Lieutenant Colonel Dale Di Mendoza, the SO1G8, responsible for finance and contracts in the GDF. To my left is Colonel Hussein, Director General of the CDC. I am Captain Vernon Bornett, the accounting officer of the Guyana Defense Force. And to Colonel Hussein's left is Derek Cummins, Permanent Secretary of the Prime Minister's.
Thank you. So, members, we are going to be looking at the performance report for the procurement, storage, and distribution of COVID-19 supplies, which was done by the audit office under this ministry. So the document has been circulated to all members, and the floor is now open for members who have questions, and I give the floor to Madam Tashira to proceed with our questions. Go ahead, Member Tashira.
Mr. Chairman, you're being anticipatory. I didn't know I would be first, but I find
That's on the preliminary discussions.
Thank you. A number of questions I have to ask. The issue of in the first part of the report, 14 to I think it's around 20, is the issue of the contracts that were done by the CDC and the ministry that did not have dates of delivery, for example, and one could not know whether the supplies were delivered or not, in some cases delivered long after. So that's one question to do with paras 14 to, I think, 22. On paragraph 24,
Can we allow the member to respond to the first question and then we will
Sure.
proceed?
sure, because just let me corollary that, Mr. Chairman, with, as we know, the Procurement Act and the NPTAB has standard bidding documents, including standard documents for single sourcing. And these are on their website that one could download. So what I find strange is contracts were done that didn't abide with the procurement laws.
Go ahead, PS.
Thank you, Chair.
You got a question, right?
I got the gist of it, and I will respond for the Ministry of Health side in general. We found in these queries that apparently the findings show that the contracts did not have certain information such as penalty clauses to hold the suppliers accountable for delivery at a specified time. And we also found that that there were, in the queries stated that some deliveries were made late beyond the specified time. And so the two things correspond in terms of implementation. The general, based on my research with the members that manage this period, the general information that we got is that because of the circumstances of the COVID, they were forced to be lenient with the delivery periods in order to get the product versus being too aggressive with the cutoff, the penalties of the contract. On the penalty clause, we had a meeting with the Auditor General's office and we validated that the sampling of the contracts that we checked in that period, it did indeed have certain clauses as per the contract document. So that's the short response to the observation.
Do you have a follow-up, member, to share?
Yeah, the comment made by the Auditor General's office is that the contracts for this CDC lack key details. Is that correct or not? And secondly, were the contracts, there's a standard kind of contract. There are some things that may be specific to the contract, but there's certain specificities that must be in the contract. So why were the contracts of the CDC, according to the report, lacked key details? Secondly, to do with the Ministry of Health contracts, as the PS is saying that there were, in some cases, penalty clauses. Why were they not invoked? And just a general comment, I'm sure the Ministry of Health is, and those who've been around for a while, are aware that we have faced epidemics before. One was the cholera epidemic in 1992-93. Then we came to SARS and the global alert on SARS, which called on countries to buy materials and drugs, etc., and also the Zika epidemic that was in our neighboring country, Brazil. All of these led to the Ministry of Health being on high alert and purchasing. I'm not aware in that period that the procurement regulations were breached and were pointed out in the Auditor General's report.
Yes, I believe you have to proffer a comment based on what the Madam Chair, I didn't hear a question in that, Could you repeat it if you did? Ask a question.
One of the questions was that with the CDC contracts, why weren't they standard contracts that included key details as pointed out by the Auditor General's report? Secondly, why were the penalty clauses which existed in some contracts as stated by Mr. Watkins, why were those not invoked as the non-delivery or late delivery led to this situation where there were not enough PPEs, for example, in the system, even though large amounts of money were spent to procure them?
So go ahead, Ms. Member Watts. I think the latter question is for you.
So to answer the latter question from the honorable member, I can just, what we have found based upon the discussions with the team members at that time, it is not clear whether the circumstances should be the only reason for late deliveries or contract performance at that time. What we can say is that currently, and when I subsequently took over during the pandemic, we aggressively and continue to aggressively hold suppliers accountable for delivering on time. However, there are exceptions that was of global in nature. So we cannot fully say, from my opinion and observation, that the pandemic should be the only reason for these suppliers not delivering or performing. As per the contract requirement, there seems to be that there would have been some level of maybe lack of attention to properly engage and hold the suppliers accountable as well.
You can agree that the COVID had disrupted the entire global chain with regards to supply and logistics with regards to making those supplies arrive on time as well, globally.
But,
Yeah,
but Chairman, can I just comment? PPEs are standard in the Ministry of Health and public health institutions. PPEs were not specific to COVID. PPEs are standard wear in certain situations in health facilities, and supply should have been in
The question has to be in line with the supply and the contract, what the contract asked for. And if the PVP was a part of the contract, then it is a response that caters for that. Go ahead, Piers.
At different times during the pandemic, there were different challenges. As I said earlier, during that period of time, depending on the nature of the contract, if it's a PPE contract, we cannot prove exclusively that the reason for late deliveries was solely because of the pandemic. There may be elements of, maybe lack of management. But some points during the COVID pandemic, there were global shortages, especially for masks and PPEs, where there were piracy between Canada and Europe and so forth. So there were periods where they were hard to get, but I cannot clearly say that that is the only reason for these contracts being poorly performed.
Well, based on the report and its findings, it spoke to the fact that there were late arrival of the PPE, which is as a result of the contract that was signed. So the fact that it arrived late, then it has to be with regards to where it was being supplied from, because it was a contract signed for it to be supplied from a different destination and it arrived late. So one therefore can assume that the global issue with regards to the supply chain probably contributed to that, but we don't know, and the report didn't say that. It said it arrived late.
It's a contribution, but I cannot say it's the only reason.
Yes, member Barnett, you want to comment with regards to the CDC aspect of the member's question?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'll request if Colonel Hussein.
Yes, go ahead. Certainly. Colonel Hussein, you have.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
I'm Colonel Hussein. I'm currently the Director General of the Civil Defense Commission. I can attest to what the PSA say during that period. We did have issues of supply. We were in a mode where.
Can you pull down the mic a little, sir?
Sure.
Yeah.
We were in a mode where we were even improvising because of the lack of face masks. We were making face masks at the CDC to supply the populace, and that itself attests to the shortage of the item. And then, alternately, we were trying to acquire face masks for the general populace, and that itself was challenging based on, as you indicated earlier, the supply chain issues, in which I would want to differentiate between the epidemics of cholera and Ebola and a global pandemic. Yes, that's rough this world.
Mr. Chairman, Colonel Hussein has not answered my question. My question had to do with 9 contracts prepared by CDC, which lack key details, did not have definite terms as to the start and end dates for delivery of the said items. I am asking, why did CDC not have these key details in the contracts that they provided? We all know about the chain of supply, et cetera, but the contracts are pretty standard for procurement. Why did the CDC contracts, 9 of them, lacked key details? That's my question. I'm not interested really.
Member, you respond to the member's question.
Sure, Mr. Chair. On detailed examination, It is true that they lack the detail. However, um, I can't say at this point what attributed to the lack of details, if it was panic buying or if it was the efficiency of the staff. However, all these have been recognized and they're currently being addressed.
Can I have a follow-up? Does Colonel Hussein accept that the CDC breached procurement regulations?
Yes, Madam Minister, I acknowledge because it's stated clearly in the Auditor General's report. There was definitely a breach, and that is being corrected at the moment. Under my time. Over.
Could I make a follow-up observation?
Yes, go ahead.
Because whilst you're saying, PS, that you had all these issues with COVID and supply and deficit and all of that, but the mere fact that the contract did not have a penalty would have allowed the supplier, the supplier that he's not going to be penalized, so he could take his own good time to supply.
Through the chair, I respectfully ask that the AG clarify the issue of the contract clause query, but on the issue of enforcing the contract, my observation and the research I did show that is a combination of circumstantial and also poor management of the contract.
Member, Maipoya.
Thank you, sir. Sir, it says here at 14, a contract described as a legal agreement existing between two parties must have 5 essential elements. And may I ask the AG, what are the 5 essential elements that are necessary for this contract? It didn't state it here. I'm not a lawyer. I never said that. That's not on record.
Okay, the member has a for the members' edification, AG, could you respond to the members' question?
Man, shut your mouth, let me hear the AG demand. No, me finish. I got 2 follow-up.
Mr. Chairman, I had my light on. Yes. Tell him of acceptance, consideration,
The AG got to answer the question. You want to be the AG now? You don't want to, you get the Attorney General. What you want, Auditor General?
Offer, through the chair, it is offer, acceptance, condition,
Consideration and exemption clause.
determination and performance.
Good. So, sir, in terms of the Civil Defense Commission, and we did ask for the officers who are present here for their time when they were in their respective positions. So can I ask if the officer who was responsible for to draft these contracts are present here?
Colonel Hussein's Civil Defense Commission. I took over the Civil Defense Commission in July of 2022. My predecessor has since resigned. He is now engaged in by CDEMA in Barbados. The accountant at that time has also resigned and is not on the job. And to add some clarity to the whole accountability arrangement at that time, during the period that we are dealing with, the Civil Defense Commission fell under the Guyana Defense Force for accountability. And the Guyana Defense Force, of course, comes under the office of the president. Because they are from Treasury, there's an accounting officer in Guyana Defense Force. So the accounting officer for that period would have been Colonel Anderson of the GDF. And he is not on the job
moment. Right?
So no staff member of yours that is present here with us played any direct role in the drafting of these contracts?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
Member Datadin?
could I ask the PS, these contracts had performance dates? Were the dates by which performance had to be done, were they specified?
Through the chair, based on the samples we reviewed, the date of the contract, we did see a delivery period. So let me. So we did see a delivery period. There was a time frame for delivery.
And was there a commencement date of the contract?
There was, and further discussions with the procurement officer at that time, they are using the commencement date as the date of signing the contract.
But it doesn't state in the contract that this is the commencement date.
That one specifically, I will scan through and let you know. Just 1 second.
And what about the date at which the contract comes to an end, or was the contract intended to be ongoing?
Normally, for the supply of goods, the contract comes to an end when the goods are fully delivered within the delivery period.
Now, these contracts were sole sourced, were they? Were they sole sourced?
Yes, the contracts on the query, most of them were sole source for various things, including PPEs. And it from the findings of them, sometimes there were the process being completed before the paperwork is followed.
What process was completed before the paperwork?
Meaning they would have secured orders, in some instances, secured the order from the supplier before an award is given or before an official notice to deliver was provided. And the reason keeps pivoting back to the circumstances. But I wish to know that I took over in the same climate and we make sure we did public tenders and sign contracts and have our awards in place.
Sole sourcing would require that you have or you identify a list of persons from which you would tell essentially the tender board that these are the people that would be able to supply, wouldn't it?
That would be selective tendering. Sole sourcing would be when you ask the tender board for one specific supplier.
Was that ever done before the contract would have been entered into?
There were a few instances when they engaged the supplier to deliver before engaging tender board.
So well, can we work backwards then? How would that supplier have been identified? What would be the usual process?
There is no legal process to ask a supplier to deliver a product without having an approval.
No, I don't mean that. How do you arrive that this is the supplier you're going to?
Depending on the circumstances, it's for many reasons. I would assume in an example where I need something, we would have to do some kind of scanning of the market to understand who have the product you need urgently. And then
So when you would do that, you would have to do some due diligence about who could supply the materials.
That's correct.
Do you have any information or do you have any record that was done, that the persons that you were engaged in were people who had the capacity or who had supplied the ministry before? Do you have any information about that?
We found no evidence of due diligence or any form of checks being done to properly validate the suppliers but we would have to go case by case. But from my research, we did not find any first layer of due diligence.
So can you provide to us then, on the basis of the suppliers, the 9 contracts? Firstly, the 9 contracts were with different entities or more than one contract to a single entity?
I think the specific case you're raising, this is for CDC, the 9 contracts is for CDC. But the general questions I've answered.
Okay, so could Colonel Hussein
tell me if the 9 contracts, were they all 9 separate entities, or were there more than one contract?
Can you speak up, sir?
We're not hearing.
There were more than one contract for different entities.
So, all right. So let's go backwards then. 9 contracts we're talking about here. How many total entities were involved? You didn't bring it up. So you're telling me. You're there reaching the time. You know that. You weren't born into it. Record.
Records show 9 different entities.
9 separate entities.
Correct, sir.
Were the contracts that were used for the 9 separate entities, were they identical or were they materially different?
The local ones will be identical. The only one is the one from China that we didn't see a contract.
Which is the one from China?
There was a purchase of PPEs, personal protective equipment from China, Jinjing Import and Export, on the March of 2020.
In March of 2020, and you have no contract for that?
We haven't seen a contract. It was a purchase.
But that's a major breach of the procurement rules. In other words, this wasn't single sourced. You didn't have
give you the floor, Madam Teixeira.
Sorry?
I didn't give you the floor.
Oh,
so if you don't have a contract, how do you know what should have been supplied? Here now, you could go sit there. Good. Colonel, if you didn't have a contract, how do you know what should have been supplied?
Colonel, for the committee's benefit, can you determine if there was indeed a contract that facilitated that, even though even though you cannot find it at the present moment? Was a contract in existence that caused these goods to be procured and delivered?
I cannot say that contract is in existence. I haven't seen it. However,
do you have
purchases could have been done through a purchase order?
Chair, on a point of order, we can ask the audit office for guidance.
Can the AG determine if there was indeed a contract? Because the report reflected that there were 9 contracts.
And we have to get a copy too if Mr. Datlin is getting a copy. We want to see it too.
So there was a contract, AG? Okay, yes, there was a contract.
The man never said it.
You want to know who signed it?
I could care less.
Aye.
Now, so the rules, as I understand it from the PS, is that entities that had supplied before or you had relations with before, that's how you would then go and say, this is the entity supplying. Now, in terms of the 9 contracts that you came to, were these picked to say these are the 9? Were any other entities approached? Or do you have a record that it was other than handpicked, meaning were other entities approached with the ability to supply or inquiries made? He's a record keeper. He has a record.
I can't say at the moment, sir.
No, this is for the food. This is for the food. Find one. No. So what my question, Colonel, so to be clear, the entities that were picked for which you went to supply materials of whatever kind, these 9 contracts, were there any alternatives? How were they picked? How were they handpicked out of all of the lot to be able to supply?
I can't say at the moment, sir, but however, I could add some clarity. Some of these entities were pre-qualified by the Guyana Defense Force.
That's my point.
And that's how they would have been selected.
This is the best thing, isn't it? So of the pre-qualification, was there only one company pre-qualified or several would have been pre-qualified?
Who's the chief of staff? Now, Mark Phillips. Middle of the signature.
Thank God for this.
Do you have a follow-up member?
Yes, I did. I asked if there was it one company that was pre-qualified for all of these things? There must be multiples. So how did you end up picking this one? There must have been several companies that the GDF would have pre-qualified. How did we end up picking this one, especially the one in China?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Member Boyd.
so as I look at the list, we have several companies here who were pre-qualified by the JDF at the time. I'm going to make an assumption that
No, we don't want any assumption.
so
There's 7 companies that were pre-qualified, and based on the GDF judgment, they made a choice. Yes. Were the companies the contract that was awarded, was it awarded to one of the pre-qual companies from the GDF?
Well, we have 9 awards that were given, and it's 9 different companies.
And all of those had the accreditation from the GDF.
I recognize.
Mr. Chair, could we get the list of those pre-qualified companies?
I recognize at least 4 of them, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, can we ask for a list of the companies that the GDF at this time were on the pre-qualification list first? But my question is, how many entities were on the pre-qualification list, and whether these 9 contracts relate to an entity on the pre-qualification list? So there were 9 contracts. Are all 9 companies on the list?
I think we're going into a realm that defeats the objective of the performance audit that we are supposed to be interrogating. It is to determine if the performance of the agency with regards to the resources that were allocated to them, if the objectives of that set allocated resources were achieved. And the audit office did a performance audit to make that determination. I think we're going into the line of questioning that isn't supposed to be with regards to this performance audit.
With respect, Mr. Chairman, the performance audit would include how did we arrive at the entities that we did to spend the money. So what we're asking is, if they are pre-qualified list, how many of them were on the pre-qualified list?
Member, I would redirect your attention to read the report.
I read the report.
And it is the report that we are interrogating.
That's what I'm asking.
That is not in the report.
Mr. Chair.
Performance audit.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Member Patterson.
Yes, I'm with you because I can't remember the name of the young person that presented the synopsis on behalf of the
Ms. Scan.
But at her presentation, she made a clear distinction what the performance audit is intended.
1 second, member, you probably would like to hear what the members say.
Yes, she made a very clear distinction as opposed to what the performance audit is, the information we're supposed to garner and the outcomes and the assessment between that and a financial regulatory audit. Maybe you may want to highlight it back again for Mr. Dattadin and for the committee. She at the very outset of our beginning of our presentation, she said, "Oh, this is the clear distinction between where we're going now, as opposed to what the performance audits are supposed to be." So I'm just because like you, I'm a bit lost where we're going now.
Yes, member financial.
Thank you, sir. I've been trying.
So, Mr. Chairman,
I think I'm on
member
the floor.
financial.
If I'm so guided, thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, I've been trying
Mr.
to
Chairman,
get
I was
the floor.
I was in the middle of saying what I'm saying. We had comments from Mr. Patterson.
Member,
I don't know that I need to pay any
respectfully,
attention to his
the
comments.
chair give the permission to Ms. Finance.
Thank you,
Proceed.
sir. Thank you, sir. So I've been trying to get to the floor for a little while now because of the same issue that Mr. Patterson is raising, and I have to foresee my apologies to the ministry that is here for this particular part because and this is being streamed live. So for everyone, this is the very first time the PSC is actually examining a performance audit. So because of that, you may hear some back and forth as to what should be and should not be questioned at this point, sadly, at this forum here today. But sir, just for the reminder of persons here, I want to remind folks, particularly for the persons that were not did not benefit from the training that we did have. The PSC did send members, a member from the government side and members from the opposition side to a training, particularly when it comes to how we are dealing with performance audits. And it was very clear during those sessions that when we look at a performance audit is value for money. We're not to go into the accounting aspect. And when it comes to the procurement processes that we're using, those are things that you do when you're examining a financial audit. So the questions that we should be asking here today is particularly there's 6 recommendations that was made from the audit office as accomplished. There are findings that has been listed. And there are 6 recommendations. And the basis of going forward with the performance questioning at this point is to look at the 6 recommendations. And I hear a lot of questions coming on the contracts and so forth. And I want to highlight at this point, and this is going to be my question to the PS. For the first 2 recommendations, recommendation number 1 and recommendation number 2, it says in recommendation number 1, the audit office recommends that the Director General of the Civil Defense Commission should ensure that all contracts include start and end date to protect the Commission against defaulting suppliers. And the second recommendation here says the audit office recommends that the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Public Health and Director General of the Civil Defense Commission include a penalty clause in each contract and enforce the clause against delinquent suppliers. So it says here to us, sorry, that after the audit office would have concluded all its investigation, these are the 2 things that they're asking be done. So the question that I'm asking right now to the accounting officer here, the PS, is what processes, what steps rather have you taken thus far to ensure that this is in check? Are there any challenges in making sure that this is so? And obviously, I'm going to have another question to the audit office when it comes to follow-up. What procedure are you putting in place for follow-up to make sure that when we move forward, there is value for money in these processes? Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, PS.
Thank you. Through the chair, as it relates to recommendation number 2, partially offered to the Ministry of Health, We have fully adhered to these recommendations before the report was even published. Contract clause are in place. We also are aggressively working to improve contract management. That would include the enforcement of the clauses, such as penalty clause, where we've assigned staff to dedicate themselves to the delivery times, that we have performance guarantees in place, and that there's regular engagement with these contractors and regular cadence to ensure that they meet certain the requirements. However, health contracts are difficult contracts, and we do have instances where sometimes circumstances beyond our control, where we have to make exceptions for late deliveries.
Yes, and as I continue, sir, recommendation number 3, and I think this is the one that I think bears more weight for me personally. The recommendation says the audit office recommends that the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Public Health and the Director General of the Civil Defense Commission should engage the Ministry of Legal Affairs and other stakeholders to have the Procurement Act of 2003 amended to include emergency procurement policies and procedures. So, and I want to make the point right now, and I think it was made at the very beginning, that COVID-19, that whole scenario, it was unprecedented. It's something that the world faced, that the world has never really faced something of that magnitude in this time that we're living in, sir. And what is most important, I believe, is for us to have an understanding that over the years, these acts and these laws governing procedures evolve over time. And because of that, that's why we're here examining performance report right now, because there's an evolution. We're moving away from that heavy financial audit and moving towards performance audit. So in so doing, I think it is very important that persons not only come and say that, oh, well, we are fixing this and it is being done now, even though it wasn't done before and all of that. And we need to recognize that if there were challenges in actually getting these things done, what recommendations would be made at your level to make sure that it is done in a right manner, that there's legislations and laws that is making it easier on you, so that moving forward, you do not have to be slated here as breaching this and breaching that. If there is no law that is there, that includes emergency procurement policies and procedures, what is your recommendation? Was the Ministry of Legal Affairs even consulted with? These are the things that we want to know, so it's going to be made easier as we move forward.
Yes, PS, go ahead.
Thank you.
But before you go ahead, let me remind the member, we're not moving away from financial audits. We are including performance audit because it's important for us to know, after we have given all of this money and interrogated via financial audit, how we are progressing as a nation with regards to our performance with all of these resources. Go ahead, PS.
Thank you, Chair. As it relates to the recommendation, the PS will, I would seek guidance because I'm not sure if just our ministry is experiencing this issue, which is clear here, and it seems to be more of a policy initiative that needs to be generated. But I will seek guidance on how we can approach this. But at this stage, I have not contacted Legal Affairs to change a policy on this matter. The Procurement Act does have the need to do sole sourcing based on emergency was a general clause, but to engage, I'm not sure if I am the one to initiate the change in policy, as it seems to be more of a high level issue.
Well, it's not a matter of you being the one, but as the PS, with that overarching responsibility and being part of the day-to-day operation, you see on hand firsthand, you experience what is going on, and you can make recommendations that can inform the policy.
Sorry, Chair. I just want to know that I used the Procurement Act during the pandemic, and I don't really, this issue that is highlighted here, I was able to use the Procurement Act to buy the things we need. So the recommendation, again, we'll have to look back at it to see whether we agree as a ministry and then on ways going forward. But it's not my only decision to discuss this issue.
Yes.
But the act as it stands, I use it just as it is.
Okay, ma'am.
I don't want if I can just wrap up on this particular point, sir. I don't want the point to be lost as saying that you can't move forward and you are not and you in your capacity right now is following the act as is. The very fact, and I want to make this clear, the very fact that this is a recommendation that is coming from the audit office, it's not a recommendation coming from the PAC. The audit office has recommended that the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Public Health and the Director General of the Civil Defense Commission should engage the Ministry of Legal Affairs and other stakeholders to have the Procurement Act of 2003 amended to include emergency procurement policies and procedure. This, first of all, I want to make this point, Mr. Chair, that at the completion of the performance audit report, the 6 recommendations are given. The very first thing is if the ministry, the very fact that the ministry is giving this response is indicating to me as though the ministry does not agree with this recommendation. And the very first thing should have been that the ministry accept these findings and these recommendations and you move forward as such. So for me to hear this at this point says that there wasn't much communication between the ministry and the audit office as it pertains to these recommendations, because it is at the point of examining at the PAC right now, and this shouldn't be an issue at this level. This should have been something that was ironed out before. The audit office is recommending this because the audit office sees this as a right move, that this is a legal process that can be entailed. And I don't want it to be a point, sir, that we have to go forward with from this very first examination, is that we don't just have recommendations here, and when persons leave here, it is just like this. This is a very strong recommendation, and I dare say that I support. Moving forward, let us actually look at the recommendations. We cannot move anyway. These reports make no sense if the ministry does not act on the recommendations from the audit office. That's the whole point of the performance audit report.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Madam Chair.
In relation to what Ms. Fernandez is saying, I believe the recommendation, whilst well-intentioned, is misdirected in the sense that this is a policy direction that the Auditor General should make. NPATAB is certainly a body that oversees the Procurement Act, and this is a policy direction that would have to go to Cabinet. It would be rather unusual for the head of CDC and the PS of Ministry of Health to engage on what is a policy matter. The Auditor General should have, I believe, recommendation should have been for consideration for amendment to the Act by the Ministry of Legal Affairs. That's one. The second thing to do with the comments made on performance audit. When $1 billion is spent and there were still shortages of drugs and supplies, although $1 billion was spent, that is an indication that something was wrong. And therefore, there are several things that happened that were wrong. And the report points out those. One is that contracts were given without the NPATAB approval, that contractors delivered late in some cases. And when we come to paragraph 24, over $400 million, which is almost 50% of the 900, well, more than 50% of the 983 million spent on drugs and medical supplies, that went ahead without national procurement tender approval. Not only these financial breaches, but they also leave the ministry vulnerable to lack of delivery and lack of accountability in terms and management of the supplies they've requested. So there's a link between the auditing aspects as well as the performance. If you purchase and they're not delivered, then it affects the performance of the ministry. If you have over $424 million with no approval, payments being made, contracts being signed, and that's 50% of all your medical supplies being imported for or purchased for COVID. At the same time, you have extreme shortages because the suppliers were not supplying. And this was made public in March, April, May, June of 2020. This is not secret. And so there is a connection between the financial management and procurement management of $1 billion by the Ministry of Health and the CDC in regards to what was an epidemic. Secondly, this issue of expeditious release of contracts and approved by NPTAB, I am very aware. And so NPTAB is also, and I believe FS is as well, that in an emergency, soul searching is allowed and that there are mechanical and administrative means to expedite the process with NPTAB. This can be done within a day or two. So I do not buy the argument that because of the emergency, they went willy-nilly, purchased all over the place without NPTAB approval. I do not think that reason is good enough. And I think the PS has made it clear that there was poor management of the entire process of procurement. That affected the supplies being available to the medical practitioners, the health practitioners in the public hospital and other hospitals. We know that it was publicized in the papers in March, April, May, June, that people were working in COVID wards without PPEs or using PPEs repeatedly instead of dropping them and disposing of them after each patient they encountered. So that I think we have to be careful and understand what was the context of the report and why the report came out. It is a performance audit and it's linked to how the Ministry of Health and CDC purchased the needs, the supplies that were required. And that is a major flaw in what happened in terms of the supplies and the performance. The performance was bad because, or poor, because of the inappropriate rush without keeping to basic regulations. So there's no accountability. And so if PPEs didn't deliver, no one could say why were they not delivered, who was supposed to deliver them, where were they located, etc. And that affected COVID, and that affected the health practitioners all across this country. And that's a performance issue.
Mr. Chair, could I answer the
Yes,
honorable member other part of the question?
Go ahead.
Once these reports have been submitted to the Public Accounts Committee and they have been examined, then around about 3 years after, we go back to see if these recommendations are implemented. So that's the normal policies during the performance audit. So first of all, they have to come to the Parliament and be examined. So we give the entity time in which to put this recommendation into place.
A follow-up to
Yes,
that
go ahead.
with the AG. AG, could you say whether or not the audit office was in communication with the ministry during the process of putting the report together, specifically when it comes to the recommendations that were being slated here, and if there were any issues that was stated from the ministry as it pertains to any of the recommendations being made by the audit office?
Good morning again. During our examination and at our exit conference, we would have discussed the report in the entirety. A draft report would have been sent out to the agency and we had follow-up discussion. At no time did any of the agency report the recommendations, and we are corresponding to that effect.
Could you say when this exit meeting was done?
The 7th of October, 2020. So, for example, the officer in charge at CDC then was Colonel Kester Craig, and for the Ministry of Health was Ms. Adams.
And prior to coming to this meeting here today, did the audit office engage the ministry, particularly when it comes to the entirety of this report, given that it's a completely, well, almost completely new slate of persons being here today?
On the 17th of February, our office engaged the Ministry of Health, and on the 18th, we engaged CDC. Also, a follow-up visit would have been done with CDC the following day.
And was any issues raised as pertains to the findings or the recommendations set forth in the report?
We just went through the findings, and the ministry agreed of on the report, but there was no major deviation from the report. Most of the time was just based on clarity.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say at this point in time, it would not be efficient and efficient use of the PAC's time if these things are not examined properly between the two agencies. And I want to say that the ministry, if that meeting was had, well, the communication was had as being indicated there, then that was a place in which things are said that we're not in agreement with this recommendation or so forth, because as it is, when it comes to this stage, the PAC, it should not be to trash out whether or not we agree with recommendations or not. I think that is a process that we definitely need to be cleared up, because I don't know how to move forward with my questioning if there are more recommendations. I think I'm going to ask this very openly, sir. I'm going to ask an open question to say, of the 6 recommendations, this is to the accounting officer, of the 6 recommendations made by the audit office here in the report, are there any recommendations that the ministry doesn't agree with? And of the 4 findings being highlighted also in the report, are there any findings that are not accepted by the ministry to be correct?
Go ahead, yes.
Apart from the discussion we just had about the laws, the procurement laws being changed for procurement, for emergency purchases, we do not have any objection to the other recommendations here, because as most of them was already in place when I took over, we put them in, we improved on them, so they were already as part of the normal process. So, yeah.
Chairman, if I may.
Hold on, the member has a follow.
Yes, sir, I asked a question to go into the next recommendation as being stated here. Well, another recommendation, particularly recommendation number 5, that says the audit office recommends that the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Public Health and the Director General of the Civil Defense Commission put in place gift registers to account for donations of gift items. Gifts received rather. And I want to ask both the Director General and the PS here today if they have in place, as of today, the 27th of February 2023, both of them have in place gift registers for gift receipt. Is that something that is actively being done right now?
Current state, yes. On reviewing this query before the recommendation, we found that it was not properly kept during the period in question.
No, but it didn't say it's not properly kept. It's saying that it wasn't in place. It's been asked here, the recommendation is being asked by the audit office for them to put it in place, which would give the assumption, which is saying clearly that it's not in existence. And also for the Director General, the same question.
Yes, ma'am. I can attest that there's a gift register in place, and the representatives from the audit office did ask to see it last week. So maybe they can endorse.
Yes. Dr.
Chair, I want to make a recommendation before I ask a question. That we seem to be jumping forward and backward because I'm still on page 4, and my colleague would have asked on page 8.
I wasn't under the impression that we have to go page for page. So
no, the report was before.
The report was before the
entire report.
Okay. So
Mr. Chairman,
You don't have the floor. The honorable member has the floor, and he hasn't concluded his question.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, referring to table 2, so I see there $158 million used to buy the, just picking one at random, the reagents of PCR, RNA testing. If you're talking value for money, were the items paid for here, were they all received? How do we know that they were received? Were they recorded and all of that? And to go back a bit further, so if we didn't value for money, like my colleague was saying, so how did we choose these suppliers if they were not pre-qualified? How do we know that we get value for money if we just pick someone at random? And these tests that, like I said, I chose this one here, these tests that we would have paid for, how many tests could we have done? How many were done? And we are talking value for money here.
I think the question is directed to both ministry and the citizen. Is your question for the ministry?
Okay. All right. So I think I can give a broad synopsis on the issue of value for money. So we can confirm that the items purchased during that time that were COVID related, they were delivered. And we know that now that some were delivered beyond the contract period. If we use the example of the mask, which was the main item, during that time, we see that prices for masks were averaging, the ministry was paying about $7.50 US per mask. This is a KN95. In November, October, November, when I took over, we did a public tender for masks and we paid 83 cents. So it's a matter, I guess it's a question you'd have to consider scarcity, but it's a very big difference in costs versus what we paid, what I paid, and what was paid then. For example, 10,000 masks was $15 million at $7.50 per mask. And we bought more, of course, but we only paid 83 cents in a competitive process. So that's just a small response to the value for money question.
Sorry, I follow up to that very same question, if I could, to the PS, and thank you for your response to that. But PS, when we talk about value for money, we're not talking about how much you paid for it then and how much you paid for it now. When during the COVID pandemic, when everything was at its peak, we were seeing a pack of masks was $2,000 a pack. Now it's $100 a pack, right? You took over in a very different time with a very different scenario. When we talk about value for money, sir, and I'm making it clear because that's what we're discussing right now. Sir, I would like to ask Mr. Data not to make a circus out of this questioning period. Let them not make a circus of it.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So when we talk about value for money, we're basically asking the masks that were purchased here, the masks that we're discussing here, the purchase of those items, regardless of the amount that you want to say is different from what you paid and what was paid then, were they utilized? Were they used? Did persons benefit from it? Were lives saved by this process of utilizing these masks? That's what we're asking, sir. That is value for money. That is what it is.
Go ahead, PS.
Through the chair, these masks would have purchased between
members. Allow the PS to respond. Go ahead, sir.
The period upon which we conducted the procurement in question was in the same year. The difference would have probably been about 6 months apart, but we were in the height of COVID at the same time. There was no difference in the circumstances upon when this mask was purchased and when we procured. Additionally, yes, the masks were put in use, but from a performance standpoint, as PS looking at this, I would have done more to probably get more competitive bidding, even if it was some market research to be done, because the price, we know that we were being price gouged during that time, but we could have done more to do more research.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask in relation to when we had mentioned about the procurement list from the CDC, if you could indicate to them that they should lay over who were the people at the time and if there were any that were not of the 9 contracts. If they were not pre-qualified, then the question begs the question, how would they identify it and how do we know its value for money? Because the whole purpose of the performance is you usually went to a track record, but if there was no track record, how did you know that this is what to get? So if we could just ask that the CDC, if you could indicate that they should lay that over. But on the recommendation that was made as it relates to the recommendations, a recommendation was made as it relates to engaging Ministry of Legal Affairs or whatever other agency that would be required in terms of amending the laws. What I would like to ask the PS is, you would have come into, when you would have come in, you would have still had the pandemic. The pandemic would have only been a few months old at the time. The bulk of the pandemic was subsequent to that time. And with the procurement laws that exist, that you met, that existed, were you able to effectively navigate with those laws? And were you able to receive that which you required and have it delivered in a timely manner so that you can, so the citizens would benefit?
Through the chair, the pandemic was much more severe when I took over. It was escalating. And yes, I was able to navigate the process with the existing laws. It only took us not a long period to do a public tender where we got competitive prices, as I just mentioned. And during that time, we did do a few stopgap purchases, but based upon the time span here in question, there was no reason why the procurement team at that time could have done a public tender whilst doing small purchases. And it seems that that was not done as a strategic action, which we did.
Mr.
So
Chairman.
to follow up the recommendation that was made that the laws, the core of the recommendation, the substance is that the laws should be changed to accommodate these emergencies. In your mind, you think the laws are sufficient at this time?
I think the laws are functional, and I don't want to come across dismissive to the recommendation. I think they're functional. Whether they can be improved, I believe that it should be a matter of a collective discussion.
Member Teixeira, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Can I just ask a question on 24, paragraph 24, which points out that 18 contracts valued at over 424 million were awarded before approval was received. Could the PS or CDC, well, this is health, could they say whether at any time did NPTAV give approval subsequent to the contracts being awarded? And I have a follow-up to that.
Go ahead, PS.
Through the chair, yes, the contracts that we have examined so far shows that award subsequently was provided.
For 424 million.
I do not want to say exactly for 424, but I'm getting a affirmative that yes, the awards were subsequently received after.
Secondly, when you go to paragraph 29, the conclusion, are you in agreement with the conclusion that the Ministry of Public Health and Civil Defense Commission did not procure COVID-19 supplies in an efficient manner? There was no monitoring of the performance of contracts, which resulted in the millions of dollars of supplies being delivered close to a month after the delivery dates had expired. In addition, the entities prepared purchase orders after receiving supplies. These findings made us conclude that the entities did not procure COVID-19 supplies in an efficient manner. But throughout this section, from paragraphs 1 right to 29, it is talking, the descriptions refer to breaches of the Procurement Act and regulations. Do you find that this particular conclusion, you agree with it?
Through the chair, with the exception of a few corrections in principle, I would agree with the nature of the conclusion, as the procurement process is quite a difficult process that we're still managing. However, the issue of proper monitoring of the performance of the contract, I do agree with that they could have done more to manage the contract. On the issue of the delivery dates and expiry, I believe these were mainly medical supplies and doesn't really carry a strong expiry date after the delivery period. But I would say in principle, we agree with the conclusion.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Member Mike.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I find that question very searching and the answer also, because the situation back then, this PS was not there, and the conditions that were available then, he did not serve under those conditions. So I think that question is more likely a question for the former PS and the former team that served under this period. So I think that it is only fitting that this question or these questions to that nature be asked to them. We don't know what was the circumstances they were under. We don't know what conditions they were performing under.
Mr.
So
Chairman.
I take objection to that question, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Finance.
Member Teixeira,
yes,
the member has responded. However, any member is free and have the liberty to ask whatever question they so.
Thank you. I was just following the trend of Ms. Finance. I was following the trend of Ms. Finance that she was asking the PS for the view on the recommendations. I was asking the views of the conclusions. I don't see a big distinction between both her and my line of questioning.
No, and I believe the PS response is with regards to his experience while being there at the ministry.
Exactly.
So, members, do we have any additional question concerning this performance audit for the agency?
Can we, oh, sorry. Yeah.
There being no other question, I would like to thank the PS and team for making an appearance and answering the questions, and understand that this is a new experience here at the Public Accounts Committee, and some of the questions definitely weren't supposed to be asked, were more financial based. Nevertheless, the fact that we are in our embryonic stage with regards to the performance audit, those mishaps may occur at times, but it is indeed a giant step, I believe, with respect to the Public Accounts Committee and the audit office with us examining performance audit of the respective ministries. And I believe we are on to a good start here at the Public Accounts Committee. With that said,
just one comment. So
yes, go ahead.
I am personally disappointed that the former PSs are not here, because they could have given their views also, which would have helped us.
I do share your disappointment, but life presents some unfortunate events that may hinder someone from making an appearance, but life goes on. With that said, we would like to break before we continue with the other performance audit for 1 hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
criticize it. This is our home, we love it, and we need to keep it. We have that right, so we ain't giving up no more.